Hey, hello. It's so good to have you back here. Or, if you're here for the first time, hi. This is How to Drum and Bass, where it is my mission to teach you concepts that go beyond the surface level and to go deeper than most other tutorials on the internet so that you can improve your drum and bass production. And today I want to talk about a topic that I think is very exciting, but that you might think is boring. And that topic is hi-hats. Now, hi-hats might seem really straightforward. I mean, it's literally just a bit of noise, right? And I think a lot of starting producers are inclined to just treat it as just a bit of noise. But actually, in the drum and bass genre, the hi-hats and the other top elements make up a massive amount of the energy of the track. And energy is exactly the thing that drives the spirit of drum and bass, that feeling that makes you go, oh yeah! And so hi-hats are something that we can't ignore. And as a matter of fact, hi-hats are something that we can do a lot of cool stuff with. And so what I want to show you today is a number of techniques to make hi-hats more human. Many producers who start out, or sometimes even more advanced producers, will include hi-hat by just continuously playing the same sample. And although it might not seem that way when you just listen to it on a loop, having the same sample for a hi-hat playing over and over and over again is kind of boring to the ears, because your brain very quickly gets used to information and then starts filtering it out. So by making tiny changes as if you were to hit a hi-hat in the real world rather than playing a sample over and over again, you can actually trick the listener's brain into finding the song a little bit more interesting. And so what that means is by getting closer to the more human sound, we can make our song sound more energetic, more real, more authentic, and definitely more professionally produced. And what's really exciting is you can go super deep on this, but it all stems from a really logical reasoning if you think about what happens when someone's actually making that hi-hat on a drum. So I'm excited to show you this, but before we go on, I want you to let me know in the comment what your hi-hat tricks are to make them sound more interesting. All right, are you ready? Then let's go. All right, we are in Ableton right now, and I have here loaded into a simpler, just a very simple hi-hat sound. The only thing I did is I put the volume up a little bit, and just without any processing, this sound sounds like this. Just got this on a loop here. So this is what a lot of starting producers out there would generally just use, something like this, or at a faster rate, just the same sample over and over and over again. And so what we want to do today is we want to think about the hi-hat, the actual thing that our drummer would be playing, and we're going to see what are the real-life things that could make the sound change with every single hit, and then we're going to find ways in Ableton to automate that. So we're going to look at the actual hi-hat drum device thingy, the actual physical thing, and then we're gonna randomize some parameters. And to do this randomization, we are going to use LFO here. And essentially what you can see here is that this line will start moving, and this is an LFO. And we can map something here. We can map any parameter that we want to this LFO, and it'll start moving up and down according to this LFO, which currently is a sine wave. And we can change the rate of how fast that moves. We can change the depth as well. And we can change here the amount of the parameter that it's going to vary. Don't worry, we're going to dive in directly with an example. So let's quickly look at what a hi-hat actually is and where it comes from, right? It comes from this thing right here. And as you can already see from this picture, this device is not exactly mega stable or anything. It doesn't need to be, because basically it's just a noise producer, right? It gets hit, or you use your foot to pull down on that pedal there, and it makes noise. So there's lots of things that can make that noise vary. So for example, the most logical thing is there's a guy who has a stick, or a guy who has his foot on the pedal, and this is a human being. So the power with which they're going to hit the stick or push the paddle is obviously going to vary slightly between every hit. So that's something that we want to take into account. So what that means is that the volume, so how hard, for example, that thing gets hit, it's going to affect the volume. So what can we do then? We can take this LFO, and there's actually this option here to put it at a random rate. And what you will see is rather than perfect shape like a sine wave, it'll start moving at random intervals. If I put this rate up, you will see it start moving at very random intervals. So first of all, we're going to change this rate really quickly to the actual musical note. This hi-hat will be playing approximately at a length of an eighth note. So we're going to go and put it down to an eighth note. And what you can see now is that every eighth note, this LFO has a little plateau. And that just means that it's going to set the parameter that we're going to set to it at a certain value. So let's do that. We're going to go and take this mapping function, and you could map it to this volume here. I don't like to do that because this is the volume that I needed the hi-hat just to be an okay hi-hat. So we're going to add a utility here, and we're going to take this map and we're going to click the utility here. And as you can see now, we're not playing the sample, but it's already moving randomly every eighth note this gain of this utility. So just quickly what that sounds like when we play it is like this. Now, of course, that's way too wide. See, it's going all the way from the bottom to the top. We want to reel in how much is doing that. So we can do that here. So 50% actually in this case is just 0, right? So we definitely don't want it to go below 0. So let's put it at 50. And then let's say, we just want to be subtle. Maybe it changes to something like 60. And what you see is now here, it'll change between 0 and approximately like 6 dB or something. So that already sounds like this. So you can already hear that it's differing slightly now. And so then another thing that we can also change is along sort of with that difference in power that the person uses when smashing that plate, either with the foot or with the stick. We could also add a little bit of variation in how saturated the sound is. You can give all kinds of explanations for that, but essentially this plate is never going to hit the same way. So how much the original vibrations that are coming from the device get, for example, trapped within the bells of this cymbal thing here that's on the top, that could determine how much the sound it feels saturated or not. So what we're going to do is let's just quickly copy this LFO here and add a saturator. And let's say we'll put it, but instead of using the gain, we could just click this again and we can apply it to the saturation here. And just like with the utility, 50% is 0, so maybe we keep it like that. But we reel it in just, maybe a tiny bit more, or let's keep it this way. And so if I turn off the utility effect, let's just do them one by one. See, that already changes actually a little bit the timbre of the sound. It sounds like someone's either hitting it more aggressively or not. And then another thing that you could imagine is that there is a person sitting there, right? And this person is trying to hit on a perfect 8th note all the time. But that doesn't happen, of course, because we're not exactly time perfect. So one thing that we can do to sort of emulate that is we can change the attack on the sample. So we can grab another LFO, or we can just simply copy this one again, turn it on, and we take this automation and we map it to the attack of the sample here in the simpler. And so actually this one starts at 0, which is all the way at the beginning, right? But so we want it to be here at 0, and we want it to change just a little bit. So maybe like, I don't know, like 25%. And so what that'll do is rather than starting it at the start of the sample, right, it might start it slightly past the transient some of the times, which also gives a little bit of a differentiated sound. Or maybe we try 50% or something. See, that already changes it a little bit. Sounds a little bit more natural too. All right, next, let's just add another one. And let's see what else we can do. So let's take a look at these two plates here, right? They are going to be moving once someone hits on it. And the way that they move in relationship to each other is going to change with each hit because they're both going back and forth like this, and that might not be even. So what that means is that the tail of the sound is also going to change. If you have two vibrating things and you put them exactly on each other, it's not going to, but it's going to stop vibrating pretty quickly. But if you put two vibrating plates that are not exactly on each other's, that are not exactly parallel to each other, it's going to vibrate sort of like around each other. So rather than, it's going to go, terrible explanation, but essentially it's going to make the tail a bit longer. And one cool thing that we can do for that, in fact, is we can add a vocoder here at the end where we use the noise, actually, where we use this enhance mode and we use the carrier as noise. And then we put this LFO here, we put it on the release knob here. Now, one thing just to mention real quick is you probably want to put the dry wet of this down a little bit, otherwise it could be very intense. But let's see what that sounds like. See, so it's adding sort of more of a noise tail around that, giving the impression that some of them are just vibrating a little bit longer, which is what would actually happen on a normal drum kit sometimes. So in this case, I think probably 0 and 50 is a good range, but you can of course change that to be longer too. Although that might be a bit exaggerated. You could also reel it in, so it's just very subtle, put it at maybe 20%. whatever you feel like fits your track, really. For now, let's keep it at like 50%. And so because of all these changes, especially in the way that the person is hitting it, but also the stability of this device on the ground, it's going to have a different vibration every single time that changes the timbre. The noise that it's generating, it's just going to be slightly different every time. So we want to look at as many ways as possible to variate the timbre a little bit. And since we're playing with this vocoder anyway, another really cool thing that you could potentially do is you just map yet another LFO. This time you map it to the Formant here, which in this case, we're going to want to put this at 50 again, and maybe like put this at, let's say 70 for now so we can hear the effect. Turn this one off. If you were to really exaggerate it, it could sound like this. Just again, giving more variety to the sound. And then another thing is, so you have to imagine yourself being next to the drum kit and you're observing the sound, you're hearing the sound. But for example, what's happening is if you're dancing, you're moving your head from side to side so that your ears perceive each hits, because the hits are quite fast, right? So several of them are happening while you're sort of like shaking your body around and whatever. So your perception of the sound, the panning is also going to change a bit. And there's this really cool setting actually here. If you go to the control section of your simpler, there's this control here called ran pan, and essentially that's how much percentage it's going to randomize with each hit of the sample, the panning. And so you could actually already, you don't even have to automate this necessarily. You could turn this up to like, let's say 10% or whatever. Make sure that we turn everything else off. If we turn it all the way up, you can hear it pretty clearly. Yeah, I gotta have headphones on, of course, to hear that, but still. And so we don't need it that exaggerated, but we could put this at, say, like maybe 20%. Or you could also choose, you know, to take an LFO again and map it and say that it, even that, so that the variation varies between like, let's say 10 and 20%. So that's another thing that you could do just to make it a little bit more stereo, make it sound a little bit more real to the brain, as if you're actually experiencing someone playing the hi-hat. So in that same line of reasoning, another thing that's going to change slightly is your perception of the roominess of the sound. Because when you're in a room, there's other people there and things are moving and the drummer is moving. Everything slightly changes the roominess of the sound. So we can also address that, of course. We could use a reverb, or in this case, what I like to do is I like to grab an echo. We can just put that here, and then you could do all kinds of really creative things with the echo anyhow. You could vary the left and right, you could vary the feedback, etc., but we can definitely vary this dry wet, right? We don't want too much of it, but let's just say, you know, we grab another LFO, so let's just duplicate this one again, and we apply that to the dry wet here, and we don't want it to go all crazy like this. We probably want to go back in this LFO and sort of change it from 0, which is nothing at all, to, I don't know, let's say maybe like 15%. And so not super perceivable when you're listening to it just like that. So you could go ahead and up those parameters and maybe make a little bit higher to 30% or something. But it does actually, for your brain, do a lot to make the sound a little bit more real and just get the perception of a wider energy in the room on that top element. And then lastly, what we can do is we can add yet another LFO here. All the way back in the simpler, we can map it here to this detune. And what that'll do is it'll slightly change the tuning of the sound by a couple of cents, also on a random interval. And this is also something that happens when we go back to these two plates, right? They're never going to hit each other exactly on the same spot. The stick that someone's hitting with is never going to hit it exactly on the same spot. And so that means that the bass frequency which is going to make is going to vary slightly over time and with each hit, just because of the nature of the movement of the actual apparatus and the person. So we can emulate that by using this detune function. And again, it's subtle, but it just adds a little bit more oomph. When we put it at 100%, you can hear it's quite exaggerated. So maybe we put it at like 50 or something. And if you listen closely, you can hear a little bit of extra variation. And so we've done a lot of things today, right, that give just a little bit of subtlety. But when you stack everything up, actually the difference is quite profound. And so one more thing that I'd like to add, just because I wanted to isolate everything now and make you listen to everything in isolation, I added, you know, a whole bunch of LFOs, but actually you really only need 1 or 2 of them. So here I've actually consolidated all of it into just 2 LFOs, because what you can do is you can map things here, right, which we've done already, but you can also go to this tab here and map multiple things to the same LFO. And so we just have 2 LFOs where we've mapped every single thing that we've talked about so far. And that means that they'll all get controlled from 2 LFOs. And then what you can do is you can take all the devices that we've used and you can group everything together into one instrument rack. In this case, I've called it the Humanization Control Center just because I like to be a little bit dramatic. But the cool thing about this is we've gone a long way adding all these devices, and it sounds like a lot of work to just do. But once you've done it once and you've set some parameters that make sense like we did just now, you can save this device here using this knob here, and you can just use it anytime you want, and you can adjust these parameters, lots and lots of parameters, and get this whole process in one go anytime you start a new track. So that's the cool part of being very thorough about something, because you can just save everything to a device and then use it later whenever you want. And so if we take the dry sound that had literally like nothing on it, of course it's just the same sample, but it sounds like this. Or faster. But then if we take this consolidated device with all the things that we just talked about in this video, and I've changed the raise here a little bit just for it to be just enough variation, then it sounds like this. And you can even dial that variation in a little bit more. Some of these were like a little bit maybe too saturated or something. But the beauty of it is you have full control here in just these two LFOs over all these devices. So yeah, those are lots of ways to make your hi-hats more natural. And however you want to use this, the creative potential is up to you, really. You could use some of this on your drums. You could use some of this on other elements, percussion elements. Really, the world is your oyster. All right, I think that was the video. I hope you enjoyed that. And I'm really curious to know if you have any other tricks for me to know. So let me know in the comments what you're currently doing to humanize your sounds. Yeah, I'll see you in the next video.